I never thought I'd have to watch my husband betray me twice. The first time was unbearable. 5 years together, and Michael chose to spend our anniversary with her. I prepared his favorite dinner, wore his favorite dress, and waited as candles melted and food grew cold. When I finally found them at that fancy restaurant, he didn't even stand up. He just looked at me with cold eyes while his gorgeous assistant Vanessa hid the diamond bracelet meant for me. "You've been so busy with your failing business that you barely notice me anymore," he said, as if my sacrifice for his career meant nothing. When I reminded him how I'd put everything on hold for him, he simply shrugged and replied, "Maybe that was your mistake." Their laughter followed me into the rainy night, right before the accident that changed everything. But I'm no longer that woman. Reborn with memories intact, I recognize the gift I've been given. This time, he won't see me coming until it's too late. I hummed softly as I arranged the roses in their crystal vase, the centerpiece of a meticulously set dining table. Tonight marked our 5th wedding anniversary, and I had spent the entire day preparing Michael's favorite meal, beef Wellington with truffle mashed potatoes and the expensive Cabernet we'd discovered on our honeymoon. Our apartment smelled divine, candles flickering throughout our penthouse, creating the romantic atmosphere I'd planned for weeks. I glanced at my watch again, 8:30 p.m. Michael had promised to be home by 7. I picked up my phone, tapping to our message thread where his last text read, "Big meeting running late. Be there soon." That was 2 hours ago. After sending another text, I opened our location sharing app, a knot forming in my stomach as I saw his position, the Ritz-Carlton downtown, not his office building. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Perhaps it really was a client meeting. I scrolled through my contacts, finding his assistant's number. My thumb hovered over it before I steeled myself and pressed call. "Rebecca? Hi, it's Eliza. Sorry to bother you so late. I was just wondering if Michael's meeting is wrapping up soon." The pause on the other end lasted a beat too long. "Meeting? Mr. Harrington left the office at 5. He said he had anniversary plans with you." The food grew cold as I stared at my phone, tears threatening to spill. I wasn't being paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. All those late nights, the business trips that kept multiplying, the sudden password changes on his devices, they weren't coincidences. I changed from my elegant dress into jeans and a sweater, called a taxi, and 20 minutes later found myself standing outside the Ritz-Carlton's upscale restaurant. Through the glass, I could see Michael laughing, looking more relaxed than he had in months. Across from him sat Vanessa, his gorgeous new marketing director, younger, ambitious, and clearly besotted with my husband. I watched, frozen, as Michael reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table. Vanessa opened it with a delighted smile, lifting out a diamond bracelet that caught the restaurant's soft lighting. Michael leaned across, cupping her face gently, and kissed her. The diamond bracelet I had hinted about for months, the kiss that used to be mine. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I pushed through the restaurant doors, past the startled maitre d', and strode directly to their table. Michael looked up, his expression transforming from bliss to shock to cold calculation in seconds. "Eliza," he said, not bothering to stand. "This is unexpected." Vanessa had the decency to look uncomfortable, sliding the jewelry box quickly into her purse. "I should go," she murmured. "No, stay." Michael's voice was firm. "We were going to have this conversation eventually." He turned to me, his expression hardened. "I was going to tell you this weekend." "Tell me what? That you're spending our anniversary with your mistress?" My voice was steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "That this isn't working anymore," Michael replied, gesturing between us. "You've been so consumed with trying to launch that little consulting business of yours that you barely notice me anymore. Vanessa appreciates me. I stared at him, incredulous. I put my entire career on hold to support you. I moved 3 times for your promotions. I've been building my business around your schedule. Michael shrugged. Maybe. That was your mistake. The restaurant had gone quiet, other diners pretending not to watch the drama unfolding. My face burned with humiliation. 5 years, I whispered. 5 years, and you couldn't even wait until after our anniversary. I turned to leave. Dignity, the only thing I had left. As I walked away, I heard Vanessa's voice, low but clear. God, she looked pathetic. Outside, rain had started falling, matching the tears streaming down my face. I got into my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Thunder cracked overhead as I drove, the windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. My vision blurred. From tears or the rain, I couldn't tell anymore. I never saw the truck that ran the red light. Just a flash of headlights, the screech of brakes, then nothing. I gasped awake, my heart pounding violently in my chest. Disoriented, I flung off the covers and sat up, taking in my surroundings. This was my bedroom, but different. The pale, blue walls I'd painted last summer were now cream. The wedding photo that usually sat on my nightstand was missing. The closet door stood open, revealing clothes I'd donated years ago. Stumbling to the bathroom, I flipped on the light and stared at my reflection. I looked younger. The fine lines around my eyes that I'd started noticing were gone. My hair was longer, the highlights I'd gotten for my 30th birthday absent. On shaky legs, I walked to the kitchen, where a wall calendar caught my eye. I blinked, certain I was hallucinating. According to the date, it was 5 years earlier, the exact day I'd first met Michael at a coffee shop near my old office. This isn't possible, I whispered, running my fingers over the paper to confirm it was real. I checked my phone. The date matched the calendar. I scrolled through my contacts. No Michael. My social media showed no photos of us together, no wedding announcements, no anniversary trips. Reality crashed over me like a wave. Somehow I'd been given a second chance. I remembered everything from my previous life, every moment with Michael, every red flag I'd ignored, every sacrifice I'd made, his betrayal, and the fateful drive that apparently ended my life. I sank onto my couch, mind racing. What if I could do it all differently? What if I could avoid the pain, the wasted years, the heartbreak? What if I could build the life I'd always wanted before Michael diverted my path? That morning, instead of stopping at the coffee shop where I'd originally bumped into Michael, spilling my latte on his expensive suit and beginning our fateful relationship, I walked straight past it. I felt a strange pull to enter, a déjà vu sensation, but resisted. Instead, I continued to my office and did something I hadn't done the first time around. I applied for the promotion I'd once declined because Michael's career required us to relocate. By afternoon, I had a meeting scheduled with the hiring manager. By the end of the week, I had a new job title and a substantial raise. This time, my path would be different. This time, I would put myself first. 3 years passed in my new timeline. I barely recognized my life compared to my previous existence. I'd become a senior financial analyst at Meridian Capital, a direct competitor to Michael's firm, Harrington Global. My insights into market trends were uncannily accurate. Knowledge from my future giving me an edge no one could match. I'd bought my own apartment, traveled to countries I'd only dreamed of visiting before, and built genuine friendships rather than the superficial connections I'd maintained as Michael's wife. I kept tabs on him from afar, watching as his career followed the same trajectory I remembered. I knew which clients he would pursue, which strategies would succeed, which would fail. Today marked a significant milestone. Both Meridian and Harrington were competing to acquire the same major client, a tech conglomerate worth billions. I had spent months preparing my presentation, knowing this was the account that had originally cemented Michael's reputation in the industry. The pitch meeting was being held at an upscale hotel. As I entered the ballroom for the pre-presentation reception, I spotted him immediately. Michael Harrington, slightly younger than the man who had betrayed me, but unmistakably the same. His confident stance, the way he commanded attention, the charismatic smile I'd once found irresistible. And beside him, looking exactly as I remembered from that restaurant night, stood Vanessa. Michael hadn't met me in this timeline, yet seeing him triggered a cascade of emotions: anger, hurt, and surprisingly, a strange sense of power. I knew him intimately, while to him, I was just another competitor. I watched as he charmed everyone around him, working the room with practiced ease. When he finally approached my group, his eyes lit up with interest as we were introduced. "Eliza Chen, Meridian's rising star," my colleague announced. Michael extended his hand, his smile turning warmer. "I've heard impressive things about you, Ms. Chen. They say your market predictions are practically clairvoyant." I accepted his handshake, feeling nothing but cool detachment. "Just thorough research, Mr. Harrington. Nothing magical about it." "Please, call me Michael." His eyes lingered on mine a moment too long. "I have a feeling we'll be seeing a lot more of each other." Across the room, Vanessa watched us with narrow eyes. I smiled inwardly, recognizing the familiar signs. Michael was already involved with Vanessa, yet here he was, initiating his well-practiced routine with a new prospect. Some things never changed. But this time, I wasn't naive. This time, I held all the cards. The tech conglomerate executives entered the ballroom, and the formal presentations began. I delivered mine first, speaking with confidence that came from knowing exactly what the client wanted, insights I'd gleaned from my previous life. When Michael presented after me, I noted he used several strategies I recognized, approaches that had impressed me when we first met. By evening's end, the client had made their decision. As the CEO shook my hand and confirmed Meridian Capital would handle their portfolio, I caught Michael's expression, a mixture of surprise and keen interest. In my previous life, this victory had been his. "Congratulations," he said later, approaching me at the cocktail reception. "That was quite impressive." "Thank you," I replied. "Competition keeps us sharp." "Indeed it does." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I'd love to hear more about your approach sometime. Perhaps over dinner?" And there it was. The same invitation, the same charming smile, even the same slight tilt of his head. In my first life, I'd been flattered, excited by the attention from such a successful, handsome man. "I don't normally mix business with pleasure," I responded, echoing his familiar script. His smile widened predictably. "Neither do I, usually. But there's something about you, Eliza." I made him wait for my answer, taking a deliberate sip of champagne. "One dinner, next week." As I walked away, I felt Vanessa's eyes burning into my back. Good. Let her worry. Let her feel what I once felt, watching my husband's attention drift elsewhere. It was all part of the plan. Over the next few months, I allowed Michael's pursuit to progress exactly as it had before. The expensive restaurants, the thoughtful gifts that demonstrated he'd been paying attention to my casual mentions, the late-night calls that grew increasingly personal. He was, as I remembered, an expert at making a woman feel like the center of his universe. When he first kissed me on a rainy evening outside my apartment building, I felt nothing. No spark, no flutter of excitement. Just cold, calculated satisfaction as another piece moved into place on my chessboard. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, his forehead touching mine. "I know we haven't known each other long, but this feels different." I smiled up at him. "It does, doesn't it?" Meanwhile, I was building my case file. Discreet inquiries confirmed Michael was still seeing Vanessa, among others. My position at Meridian gave me access to financial data that revealed the increasingly risky investments Harrington Global was making. The same patterns I remembered from before, the same hubris that would eventually lead to their downfall. When Michael invited me to a weekend getaway 6 months into our relationship, I accepted. It was at the same luxury resort where, in my previous life, he'd first told me he loved me. The script played out with eerie precision. "I love you, Eliza," he said, holding my face between his hands as we stood on the private balcony overlooking the ocean. "I've never felt this way about anyone." I wondered briefly if he'd said those exact words to Vanessa the week before. My intelligence suggested they were still meeting regularly. "I love you too," I lied easily, letting him pull me into his arms. The next morning, while he showered, I quickly checked his phone, confirming my suspicions. Text messages to Vanessa, arranging to see her upon his return. Messages to another woman, someone new in his office, plus emails about client accounts that confirmed Harrington was taking unauthorized risks with investor money. I took quick photos of everything with my own phone, then replaced his exactly as I'd found it. By the time he emerged from the bathroom, I was sitting on the balcony sipping coffee, the perfect picture of a woman in love. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "The future," I said honestly. Over the next 18 months, I orchestrated the most calculated performance of my life. After winning the tech conglomerate account, using insider knowledge from my previous timeline, I allowed Michael to pursue me. Our chance encounters at industry events became regular, his interest obvious and persistent. I maintained perfect emotional distance while giving just enough encouragement to keep him engaged. When he finally asked me to dinner, I accepted with feigned reluctance. "I don't mix business with pleasure," I told him over expensive wine. "Neither do I, usually," he replied with that smile I once thought sincere. "But I can't stop thinking about you." I'd heard those exact words before, in another life. As our relationship progressed, I watched the pattern unfold, exactly as I remembered. The lavish gifts, the passionate declarations, the subtle manipulations. I played along, all while gathering evidence of his ongoing affairs, including his continued relationship with Vanessa. I also gained access to sensitive information about Harrington Global's practices. The firm was making increasingly risky investments while presenting a conservative face to clients, a strategy that would eventually lead to substantial losses in my previous timeline. 6 months into our relationship, as I'd predicted, Michael proposed. The restaurant he chose was ironically the same one where I'd caught him with Vanessa in my previous life. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," he said, offering me a diamond ring significantly larger than my first one had been. "I know it's fast, but when it's right, it's right." I smiled, accepting the ring while feeling nothing but cold calculation. "Yes," I said simply. That night, I updated my secret file, a comprehensive dossier documenting Michael's professional misconduct and personal infidelities. The wedding was set for exactly 8 months later, plenty of time to finalize my plan. As the wedding date approached, I began making strategic connections with Harrington Global's board members. Casual conversations at charity events, thoughtful insights shared during industry conferences. I carefully positioned myself as a respected voice in the financial community, someone whose concerns would be taken seriously. I also reached out to Vanessa, arranging a private meeting at a quiet cafe across town. "I know about you and Michael," I said without preamble as she sat down. Her eyes widened briefly before her expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were photos, text messages, hotel receipts, irrefutable evidence of their ongoing relationship. "I'm not here to threaten you," I continued calmly. "I'm here to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" she asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Michael isn't just cheating on me with you. There are others. I pushed a second envelope toward her. And he's involved in financial improprieties that could sink his career and possibly lead to criminal charges. She paled as she scanned the documents. Why are you showing me this? Because you're being used, just like I was. And like me, you deserve better. I leaned forward. Help me expose him, and I'll make sure you come out unscathed. The board will know you cooperated fully. Your career will survive. Vanessa stared at me for a long moment. You've been planning this all along, haven't you? Even when you started dating him. I just smiled. Sometimes we need to create our own justice in this world. Are you in? After a day to consider, she called me. I'll help you. With Vanessa's cooperation, I gained access to even more damaging information, internal emails, recorded conversations, witness accounts of Michael's unprofessional behavior. By the time our wedding was a week away, my case against him was airtight. The night before the ceremony, I sat alone in my apartment, reviewing everything one last time. A moment of doubt crept in. Was I becoming like him? Calculating, manipulative, cold? Was revenge worth compromising my own integrity? My phone lit up with a text from Michael. Last night as a bachelor. Don't wait up. Moments later, another. Text came through, clearly meant for someone else. Meet me at the usual place. Need to see you before tomorrow. My resolve hardened. Some people never changed, but I had. Early the next morning, instead of heading to the church where our wedding was scheduled for the afternoon, I arrived at Harrington Global's headquarters. I'd arranged an emergency board meeting through Richard Pembroke, the CEO, who had been deeply concerned by the preview of evidence I'd shown him days before. One by one, the board members arrived, followed by the women who had agreed to testify, Vanessa and two others from the company who had been involved with Michael while he was with me. I stood at the head of the conference table, outwardly calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. This moment had been years in the making, not just the 18 months of this new timeline, but the accumulated pain and humiliation from my previous life as well. Thank you all for coming, I began. I know this is unusual, especially on a Saturday. Richard Pembroke nodded grimly. Ms. Chen has brought some disturbing information to our attention that requires immediate action. I distributed folders containing meticulously organized evidence, financial records showing unauthorized risk exposure, emails revealing client misrepresentation, and documentation of Michael's inappropriate relationships with subordinates. Is this all verified? Pembroke asked, looking pale as he flipped through the pages. Every detail, I confirmed. The SEC will receive the same documentation on Monday unless immediate. Action is taken. The elevator chimed, and Michael strode in, looking confused and irritated. He was wearing the suit he'd planned to get married in, his boutonniere already pinned to his lapel. What's going on? He demanded, scanning the room. I got an urgent call to... He stopped short, seeing me. What are you doing here? We're supposed to be getting married in 3 hours. Plans have changed, I replied evenly. Take a seat. Michael. Michael reluctantly sat down, his eyes darting nervously between me and the board members. I could see confusion and anger warring on his face as he struggled to comprehend the situation. Michael, Pembroke began gravely, Ms. Chen has brought some disturbing information to our attention. Unauthorized investment strategies, misrepresentation to clients, and inappropriate relationships with subordinates, creating significant liability for the firm. Michael's face drained of color as he looked at the evidence spread across the table. This is absurd. It's a fabrication. He turned to me, voice lowering to a venomous whisper. What do you think you're doing? Exactly what you taught me, I replied calmly. Looking out for myself. Vanessa stepped forward, placing her phone on the table. It's all true. I have the emails, the texts. He promised each of us the same things: promotions, marriage, a future. The other women nodded in confirmation, their expressions determined despite their obvious discomfort. Michael looked wildly around the room, seeking any ally. Finding none, his eyes returned to me, suddenly narrowing with an odd recognition. "You look familiar somehow," he said slowly. "Like I've known you before. This whole time, it's felt like you were 3 steps ahead of me." "How?" "We never met in this life," I replied, allowing myself a small, enigmatic smile. "But in another, you broke my heart." His expression flickered with something like fear, just for an instant, before hardening into rage. "You're insane. This is all a setup." "Mr. Harrington," Pembroke interrupted, "the evidence speaks for itself. The board has reviewed Ms. Chen's documentation thoroughly. These are serious violations of company policy and potentially securities law." One of the board members, a stern older woman, leaned forward. "The question now is whether we handle this internally and cooperate with any necessary authorities, or whether we allow this to become a public scandal that destroys shareholder value." I watched Michael's calculating mind working behind his eyes, immediately shifting to self-preservation. It was exactly what I'd expected. "Of course I want to protect the firm," he said smoothly. "There may be some misunderstandings regarding investment strategies that should be clarified, but I've always acted in the company's best interests." "And the inappropriate relationships?" Pembroke asked pointedly. Michael attempted a dismissive laugh that fell flat. "Consensual relationships between adults. Perhaps unwise, but hardly criminal." One of the women, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "You threatened to block my promotion if I ended things. You said no one would believe me if I reported it." The room fell silent. Michael's charm evaporated entirely, replaced by barely concealed panic. "The board will meet privately now," Pembroke announced. "Michael, please wait in my office." As Michael was escorted out, he turned back to me. "Why today? Why our wedding day?" "Poetic justice," I said simply. "I wanted you to know what it feels like to have everything taken away when you're expecting happiness." The deliberation was brief. Within 30 minutes, the decision was unanimous. Michael was terminated effective immediately. The SEC investigation would proceed, but the firm would cooperate fully to minimize damage. As for the personal misconduct, the company would settle quietly with the women involved. I declined to press charges for the misrepresentations he had made to me personally. My revenge was complete. I didn't need to drag it out through the courts. Outside the building, as rain began to fall, so similar to that fateful night, I opened my umbrella and took a deep breath of fresh air. My phone buzzed with a notification. Meridian Capital had just acquired Harrington Global's largest client. 6 months later, I declined the CEO position offered by Meridian, instead launching my own financial consulting firm. The experience with Michael had taught me valuable lessons about power, control, and the importance of creating my own path. At my office opening reception, I spotted a familiar face, Michael, now unemployed and significantly less polished, working as a waiter for the catering company. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a subdued, haunted look. Our eyes met briefly across the room. I felt no triumph, no joy at his downfall, only a quiet sense of closure. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Later that evening, as guests mingled and celebrated, a handsome investor approached me. James Reynolds, head of an ethical investment fund I'd admired for years. "Congratulations on your success," he said warmly. "Your firm's ethical investment approach is exactly what the industry needs." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely smiling. "Would you consider having dinner with me sometime?" he asked hesitantly. "To discuss potential collaboration, of course." I hesitated, old fears briefly surfacing. Then I looked around at the life I'd built on my terms, with my strength. I think I'd like that, I said. That night in my new office, I stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. On my desk calendar, circled in red, was the date of my death in my previous life, now just another day in a future entirely of my making. Thank you for the second chance, I whispered to the night sky. Then I turned away from the past and walked confidently toward my future, reborn, remade, and finally free. I met James for dinner the following week. Unlike my calculated meetings with Michael, this was refreshingly honest. We talked about market ethics, sustainable investments, and personal boundaries. He asked about my history, and I gave him a version of the truth, that I'd once been involved with someone who betrayed me, and it had shaped my approach to both business and relationships. Trust has to be earned, I told him, and some people are simply incapable of deserving it. He nodded thoughtfully. My father always said character is what you do when no one is watching. I've tried to live by that. Over the following months, my firm thrived, building a reputation for ethical investments with strong returns. James and I developed both a professional partnership and a personal relationship, one based on mutual respect and transparency. I occasionally heard news of Michael. After his firing, he'd struggled to find work in finance. The industry was smaller than it appeared, and word had spread. Without his status and wealth, Vanessa had quickly moved on to another promising executive. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a sense that justice had been served. 1 year to the day after what would have been our wedding, I received an unexpected email from Michael. It was brief but sincere. I still don't understand everything that happened, but I know I hurt you deeply. I'm trying to become a better person. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. His apology changed nothing, but I appreciated that he'd made it. Perhaps he too had learned something from our shared experience. That evening, James proposed. Not with grand gestures or lavish displays, but with honesty and warmth. I love who you are, he said simply. Your strength, your integrity, your resilience. I don't want to possess you. I want to build something meaningful together. I accepted, knowing this time was different. This relationship wasn't built on manipulation or deceit. It was built on mutual growth and genuine connection. At our small, intimate wedding 6 months later, I felt no déjà vu, no echoes of my previous life. This was entirely new territory, a future I had created through my own choices rather than following someone else's script. As James and I danced our first dance as a married couple, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. Death, rebirth, revenge, and finally, renewal. I had been given a rare gift, the chance to rewrite my story, to avoid the traps I had fallen into before, to recognize red flags before they became disasters. But the true redemption hadn't been in destroying Michael, it had been in reclaiming myself, in refusing to be defined by his betrayal. In my new life, I had learned to value myself first, to build genuine connections, to wield power ethically. Those lessons would stay with me always, guiding me forward into a future unburdened by past mistakes. The woman I had been, the one who died on that rainy night, would have been proud of who I had become. Not a victim, not even simply a survivor, but someone who had taken control of her destiny and transformed pain into purpose. Reborn, I had refused to suffer. And in that refusal, I had found my true strength. 5 years had passed since that fateful day when my new life began. My financial consulting firm had grown from a small startup to a respected player in the industry, known for combining strong returns with ethical investment practices. James and I had built not just a successful marriage but a true partnership, supporting each other's ambitions while maintaining our individual identities. On a brisk autumn morning, I sat in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on my door. "Ms. Chen, you have a visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's important." She handed me a business card. "Rebecca Wells, from Harrington Media Group." The name struck a chord of recognition. Rebecca had been Michael's assistant at Harrington. Global before everything fell apart. I hadn't thought about her in years. "Send her in," I said, curious about what could be so urgent. Rebecca looked much the same as I remembered, though her once nervous demeanor had been replaced with confident poise. "Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Chen," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I won't take much of your time. I'm working on a feature article about women who've transformed the financial industry, and your name tops that list." I studied her carefully. "That's flattering, but I suspect there's more to this visit." She smiled slightly. "You always were perceptive. The truth is, I've followed your career closely since you exposed Michael Harrington. What you did that day changed everything for many of us at Harrington Global." "How so?" I asked, genuinely interested. "After Michael was ousted, the company culture transformed. The board appointed Victoria Reeves as CEO, the first woman to lead the firm. Policies were implemented against workplace harassment. People like me, who'd been overlooked, suddenly had opportunities." She paused. "But that's not why I'm here." Rebecca reached into her briefcase and pulled out a file. "Michael Harrington is back. He spent years rebuilding his reputation through smaller firms, and now he's launching a new investment company. He's seeking major funding, and his pitch is compelling. I thought you should know." I accepted the file, feeling strangely detached as I opened it. Inside were press releases, interviews, and investor documents for Harrington's new venture. The photos showed a slightly older but still handsome Michael, his expression humbler, his claims more measured. "Thank you for this," I said, closing the file. "But why bring it to me specifically?" Rebecca's eyes met mine. "Because he's approaching your clients, and because his new partner is someone you know well, Vanessa Chen." The shock must have registered on my face. "Chen? She married your cousin Eric 2 years ago. I imagine you weren't invited to the wedding." I hadn't spoken to my cousin in years, not since he'd sided with my parents when they questioned my decision to call off my wedding to Michael. The fact that Vanessa had married into my family and taken my surname felt like a calculated move, one designed to eventually put her in my path again. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," I said finally. "But Michael Harrington's business ventures are no longer my concern." Rebecca nodded slowly. "That's what I expected you to say. Still, I thought you deserved to know." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "There's one more thing. In his investor pitch, he mentions learning hard lessons from past mistakes. He references a woman who changed his perspective on ethics and accountability. He doesn't name you, but it's obviously about you." After Rebecca left, I sat quietly, processing this unexpected development. I should have felt angry or perhaps vindicated that Michael was using our history, however obliquely, to rehabilitate his image. Instead, I felt nothing but mild curiosity. That evening, I shared the news with James over dinner. "Are you worried?" he asked, his concern evident. I considered the question carefully. "No, not about Michael or his business, but the fact that Vanessa married my cousin and took my family name troubles me. It feels deliberate, like they're positioning themselves as rivals rather than simply moving on." James reached across the table to take my hand. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," I replied honestly. Engaging with them would only give them the reaction they're seeking. My life and business are built on solid foundations. I won't be dragged back into old battles. Over the following weeks, I received several meeting requests from Michael's new firm. I declined them all politely but firmly. Vanessa attempted to leverage my family connections, reaching out through relatives who didn't know our history. I maintained my distance without explanation. Then came the invitation. My parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and they'd planned a lavish party at their country club. The guest list included all extended family, including Eric and his wife Vanessa. "You don't have to go," James said when I showed him the invitation. "Your parents would understand." "No, I think I should attend," I replied, surprising myself with the decision. Avoiding them gives them power over me. Besides, my parents deserve to have their whole family present. The night of the celebration arrived, and I entered the elegantly decorated ballroom with James at my side, feeling confident in my midnight blue gown and the life I'd built. My parents greeted us warmly, and for the first hour, I mingled with relatives and family friends without incident. Then I saw them. Eric and Vanessa had arrived, she in a striking red dress that ensured all eyes would be on her. Our gazes met across the room, and I saw the moment of recognition, followed by a flash of something like fear in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to attend. I excused myself from my conversation and walked directly toward them, James following supportively. Eric looked uncomfortable as I approached, but I greeted him with a genuine smile. "Cousin, it's been too long," I said, embracing him briefly. Then I turned to Vanessa. "And you must be Eric's wife. I'm Eliza Chen." "We've met before," she said stiffly. "Have we? I don't recall." I maintained a pleasant expression. "But I'm delighted to meet any new member of our family." I could see the confusion in her eyes. She had prepared for confrontation, maybe even anticipated a scene that would paint me as unstable or vindictive. Instead, she faced a woman who appeared to have no history with her at all. The conversation remained polite but tense until we were joined by an unexpected addition. Michael Harrington, apparently invited as Eric's business associate, approached our group. "Eliza," he said, his voice betraying more emotion than he likely intended. "You look well." I smiled politely. "Thank you. James, this is Michael Harrington, a former colleague from the financial world. Michael, my husband, James Reynolds." The two men shook hands, Michael noticeably rattled by my calm introduction that reduced our history to a professional acquaintance. "I've been hoping to speak with you," Michael said, "about potential collaboration between our firms." "My assistant mentioned your requests," I replied evenly. "My current business model doesn't align with what you're proposing, but I wish you success in your new venture." The anniversary party continued around us, but tension hung in the air between the four of us. Michael cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with my dismissal of his business proposition. "Perhaps we could discuss it another time," he persisted. "I think you'd be interested in how our investment approach has evolved." James, sensing my slight discomfort, smoothly interjected. "I believe my wife has made her position clear, Mr. Harrington. Now, if you'll excuse us, I promised Eliza's mother we'd join her at the main table." As we turned to leave, Vanessa couldn't resist one final attempt to provoke a reaction. "Eliza," she called after me, "I always wondered how you knew so much about Michael and me back then. It was almost like you were psychic." I paused and turned, back with a small smile. "Not psychic, just observant. Some patterns are predictable if you pay attention." I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. She hadn't expected composure. She'd hoped for confrontation. "Enjoy the party," I added pleasantly, before walking away with James. For the remainder of the evening, I focused on celebrating my parents, refusing to let Michael and Vanessa's presence distract me from what mattered. They made several more attempts to engage, but I maintained polite distance without appearing affected. Later that week, I received an unexpected email from Michael requesting a private meeting at my office. Against my better judgment, I agreed, curious about what. He felt needed to be said face to face. When he arrived, he seemed different from the confident man I'd once known. both in this life and my previous one. His demeanor was subdued, his expression troubled. "Thank you for seeing me," he began after declining my offer of coffee. "What I have to say won't take long." I waited, maintaining professional composure behind my desk. "I've never been able to understand how you knew," he said finally. "How you anticipated every move I would make, every lie I would tell. It was as if you had seen it all before." I remained silent, watching him struggle with questions that had clearly haunted him for years. "That day, at the board meeting, you said something strange. You said we never met in this life, but I broke your heart in another." He leaned forward, searching my face. "What did you mean by that?" I considered my response carefully. "Some experiences are so profound they transcend ordinary understanding, Michael. I knew who you were because I'd seen who you could become." "And who was that?" he asked quietly. "Someone who valued power over people. Someone who saw relationships as transactions." I paused. "Someone who could watch a woman who loved him break apart and feel nothing but impatience." His face paled. "I've changed since then." "Have you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Or have you simply become better at hiding who you really are?" The question hung between us unanswered. "The truth is," I continued, "I don't think about you anymore, Michael. What happened between us ended years ago. I've moved forward." "With James," he said, a hint of jealousy in his voice. "With myself, first and foremost," I corrected him. "James came later, after I'd already rebuilt my life on my own terms." Michael nodded slowly. "That's why I wanted to see you. To tell you that you were right to expose me. I needed that downfall to recognize who I'd become." He stood up. "I won't bother you again. I just wanted you to know that whatever strange connection allowed you to see through me, it ultimately saved me from myself." After he left, I sat, in silence, processing his words. There was no satisfaction in his acknowledgement, no vindication in his apparent redemption. Those emotions belonged to a different version of me, a woman consumed by betrayal and revenge. I pulled out my calendar and found the date circled in red, the anniversary of the accident that had ended my first life and begun this second chance. With a sense of finality, I uncapped my pen and drew a line through the circle. It was time to let go of that marker, that reminder of a past that no longer defined me. 6 months later, James and I celebrated the news that we were expecting, our first child. As we discussed names and nursery colors, my thoughts briefly strayed to that other life, one cut short before I could experience motherhood or know what it meant to build a family with someone truly worthy of trust. In a moment of reflection, I realized the true gift of my rebirth hadn't been the chance for revenge, but the opportunity to reclaim the life that should have been mine all along. The revenge had been satisfying, yes, but it was merely a stepping stone on the path to something far more meaningful, a life lived with integrity, purpose, and genuine connection. I later heard through industry channels that Michael and Vanessa's business venture had collapsed amid accusations of financial improprieties, similar to those I'd exposed years before. They had reverted to type, unable to escape the fundamental flaws in their characters despite their claims of change. The news stirred no emotion in me. Their story was no longer intertwined with mine. On a beautiful spring morning, I gave birth to our daughter. Holding her in my arms, gazing into her innocent face, I felt a profound sense of peace. "What should we name her?" James asked softly, his eyes filled with love as he looked at us both. I thought of the woman I had been in that other life, strong enough to endure unimaginable pain, perceptive enough to recognize deception, resilient enough to survive destruction. She deserved to be honored, not forgotten. "Anya," I said, the name coming to me with perfect clarity. It means rebirth. James smiled. It's beautiful, just like her. As my daughter grew, I watched for signs of the intuition that had guided me through my second chance. Sometimes, when she'd look at me with her knowing eyes, I'd wonder if she, too, carried some cosmic awareness beyond ordinary understanding. Whatever mysteries lay behind my rebirth remained unexplained, but I no longer needed answers. I had transformed death into life, betrayal into wisdom, vengeance into justice, and, ultimately, pain into profound joy, on my daughter's 5th birthday, coinciding exactly with what would have been the 10th anniversary of that fateful night in the rain. I stood on our garden terrace, watching her play with James on the lawn below. The calendar date that had once marked tragedy now celebrated a life that would never have existed without my second chance. Thank you, I whispered to whatever force had granted me this rebirth, not for the opportunity for revenge, but for the gift of authentic life that came after. A life where I was neither victim nor avenger, but simply and completely myself. The circle was finally complete. The woman who had died in despair had been fully reborn in joy, and this time no one could take it away from me.